Let's be real here. Reading the FDD is not the most fun and exhilarating part of the franchise discovery process, just like reading purchase agreements and mortgage documents are not the most exciting part of buying a house. As it's important to review the contract you're signing before you start to pick out the new wallpaper, it's also important to understand both what the FDD means in general and, more importantly, what it means to you. But in addition to being very boring, FDDs are also very long. So in this video, I'm going to break down the top 10 most important items in the FDD you must understand when buying a franchise, including the final one, which gives you the tools you need for what I always say is the most important part of the diligence process. So grab a coffee, a notepad, maybe an Adderall, whatever you need to make sure you stick around until the very end because it's very, very important. And if you're new here, I want to take a moment to personally welcome you to this channel. My name is Connor Gross. I'm a multi-brand franchise owner as well as a franchise consultant who helps entrepreneurs and investors to find the right franchise for them. For more information or to apply to work with me directly, click the link in the description or go to connorgross.com. So before I start breaking down the specific items in the FDD, let me first walk through what the FDD actually is. The franchise disclosure document is a long document that franchisors are required to share with any prospective franchisee. The idea is that they share a standard format with the same information required that gives prospective franchisees the ability to compare them with other franchises they might be considering. So when a franchisor shares the FDD with you, they'll ask you to sign it to acknowledge that you've received it. And sometimes people freak out and say, oh no, I'm not ready to sign a franchise agreement yet. And of course you're not. There's a legally mandated 14-day waiting period between when you've received the FDD and when you're allowed to sign a franchise agreement. And this is to prevent any salesy scumbags from pressuring you into signing an agreement before you've had adequate time to review the FDD. So all the signature does is leaves a timestamp so that you're able to move forward with a franchise agreement if and only if you choose to do so. The FDD is organized in 23 different sections called items, and all 23 items have relevance. So in highlighting just 10 of them today, I'm in no way suggesting to ignore the others. But this is a list of items that deserve special consideration. First on our list, conveniently, is item number 1, which basically tells you who you're getting into business with. It gives the history of the franchisor, any parent companies, affiliates, and even if the franchisor has changed hands in the past. Really, this is an introduction to the franchise and the opportunity that's being offered. There may not be a ton of meaningful insights gathered in this item, but nonetheless, it's a snapshot and helpful background information to have as you continue to review the rest of the items that might have more quantitative details. Second on our list is item number 2, and this is where you learn about the leadership team of the franchise organization. I always say that the interfacing you do with the leadership team of a franchisor is one of the most fruitful and determinative parts of the franchise discovery process. So this item gives you your first glimpse into who they are as professionals. You'll see the background information a lot of times about the founder, executives, directors, and anyone else who may have significant responsibilities that would relate to the operations of your franchise if you decide to move forward. This will include a summary of their work experience from the past 5 years, as well as any other experience they may have as officers or directors at other companies. So third on our list is item number 3, which shows the litigation history of the franchise. And really where the rubber hits the road, a franchise is a legal relationship. So it's important to review this item to see how that legal relationship is played out for others. And it's very common for franchisors to have some history of legal action, particularly with larger brands that have been around for a while, or brands that are growing really quickly and have a lot of agreements flying around. So I'm not saying that litigation in and of itself is disqualifying, but what I am saying is that you need to review and gain clarity on any claims against the franchisor, because sometimes this can present questions or concerns you may not have otherwise thought about. So the next 3 items on our list all have to do with fees and expenses, which are obviously very important to review and understand. Item number 5 outlines the initial expenses, mainly the franchise fee, and this is typically the one-time fee that you're paying simply to acquire the rights to develop this franchise, usually within a geographic territory, and you'll hear more about that in just a second when we talk about item number 12. Item number 6 outlines the ongoing fees that will be required for the operation of the business, and these will typically include a royalty, which is a percentage of gross sales that's paid to the franchisor, a marketing fund, and many franchisors have a national marketing fund, which is also a percentage of gross revenue that franchisees pay into a pool, and that pool is used for national marketing and brand awareness. And then there also may be ongoing fees that cover technology platforms that you use as a franchisee, but are often facilitated or in some cases even created by the franchisor. Then finally, item number 7 outlines the total total initial investment that's needed to start and operate this franchise. You'll usually see a range of what that total number might look like, depending on variables like location, the number of territories, and the level of involvement of the owner. And then you'll also see a breakdown of where all this money is going, and that'll include everything from those initial fees we talked about in item 5, as well as any equipment you need, vehicles, build-out costs, marketing expenses, working capital, and everything else you need to run this business. And I always think it's a good idea to plan to invest more than what's projected for your first unit, because a lot of times you'll find stuff is more expensive, it's harder, and it takes longer than what you think it's going to take your first time around. But then after you have one franchise under your belt, you'll be in a much better position to accurately underwrite the projected cost for each subsequent location. The 7th item on our list is item number 8, and this is where any restrictions the franchisor may have on where franchisees source their products or services are disclosed. It's very common for franchisors to have established relationships with vendors who supply their franchisees, and sometimes this is a very necessary step to maintaining quality control and brand standards. So, for example, McDonald's doesn't want a franchisee to go rogue and buy, quote unquote ground beef from some horse farm down the street, because if the burgers tasted terrible and word gets out, that would negatively impact every other franchisee. But other times, though, these restrictions completely misalign incentives between the franchisor and franchisees and are simply profit centers for the franchisor. And this could be where the franchisor owns all or part of an affiliated vendor, in which case that should be disclosed in item number 1, or if they're receiving rebates from a vendor. A lot of times franchisees are able to get better deals on things like inventory because of the pricing power they get when these arrangements are made at the franchisor level. So all you're trying to understand is whether those savings will be passed along to you as the franchisee, or whether it's just adding to the franchisor's bottom line. The 8th item on our list is item number 12, which outlines what you would receive in terms of a protected or exclusive territory. And this can vary not just based on the size of the territory, but between population and geographic area, but also on the level of exclusivity. You'll want to understand the thought process and data behind how a franchisor maps out their territories to validate that it's being done in a way that gives you enough of a market to successfully build this business. So the 9th and potentially juiciest item on our list is item number 19. This is where the franchisor can disclose data surrounding the financial performance of franchisees in their system. And you'll see a wide range in the amount of information shared in item 19, but the 3 types of information you may see include numbers with quantitative data outlining revenue and expenses. You'll see notes, which might outline any assumptions that were made in the process of generating those numbers. And then you may see disclaimers, and those are intended to highlight limitations of the usefulness of the data that they provide. And I say the item 19 is the juiciest item because it's where people always head to answer the question, how much money can I make? And if you remember nothing else from this video, please remember this. The item 19 is the starting line in answering that question, not the finish line. And you'll hear more on that in the next and final item. There are a few main factors that can skew how helpful the item 19 is in helping you understand the financial performance of the business you're considering. First of all, franchisors have a lot of latitude for how much they wish to disclose in item 19. However, they're limited to only sharing with you what they have disclosed. And this is to prevent franchisors from sharing financial information with you that might influence your decision that they're not prepared to back up in court. But considering the latitude that they have and how much or how little they choose to disclose, obviously all things being equal, less disclosure is less helpful. But it also varies by how many units were taken into account in aggregating this data. For example, if the average revenue, quote unquote, is disclosed with an input of 1 location, that's obviously less valuable data than if they're showing an average of 100 different locations. And finally, geographic concentration can impact how useful the item 19 data is for you. A lot of franchises start and have their initial growth spurt in one region of the country. So for example, if you're looking at the financial data of 50 franchise locations, but they're all in affluent, urban, coastal markets, that's not going to be as helpful to you if you're in a rural market, as an example. So you might be wondering, if the item 19 isn't always reliable, how do I go about getting the most thorough and candid information about the franchise I'm considering? And that leads us to the 10th and final item on our list, item number 20, which tells you all about the franchisees that are already in the system. So the first part of the item 20 is going to show data on how many franchisees the system has, how many are open, how many have been transferred to another franchisee, and how many have closed. However, just like we discussed in the item 19, this data can be skewed in a number of ways. First of all, it's important to remember that the FDDs are filed annually, and they show data from the prior year. So the number of units and all other data may have changed in the time since the document was created. But also the number of closures that the item 20 discloses can exclude what I call call hidden closures. And hidden closures are where the franchisee doesn't actually go out of business, but the franchisor or another franchisee buys their business or territory at a significant discount. And if the franchisor does this, a lot of times it's intentionally to avoid disclosing a closure in their item 20. So if this happens, the franchisees are probably still losing a bunch of money, so it's important to find out. And you'll do that through what I believe is the most important part of the franchise discovery process, which is validation. And that's the process of talking with existing franchisees and getting their feedback. And the latter part of the item 20 gives you the tools to do just that, because it shares the name and contact information of the franchisees in this brand. Many franchisors will host like group validation calls, where they'll invite current and potentially future franchisees to get on a call and discuss. And while I do recommend participating in forums like this because it's always helpful to hear the questions that other people are asking who are considering the franchise that you are, it's also important to pick up the phone and conduct your own independent validation. And talking about the validation process could be a video in and of itself, so leave me a comment if you'd like to hear more about that. But just to highlight a couple reasons why validation is very valuable, franchisees are often eager to help and have really no incentive to share anything other than the most candid and helpful feedback that they can share. So it's important to keep in mind that during the franchise discovery process, you'll interface with a lot of people who are trying to sell you. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but it's just at the end of the day, their job is to sell franchises. So when you talk directly with franchisees, you remove that incentive and get directly to the most unbiased feedback you can get. And then as we discussed, the franchisor can't legally share any financial information with you that isn't in the item 19. But franchisees are not restricted in this way, so they can share with you as much information as they care to share. So I know the FDD can be overwhelming, but it really is one of the best tools to avoid costly mistakes when buying a franchise. But another important tool is a consultant who has been where you are and can walk alongside of you through the entire process of finding the best opportunities, evaluating them, and funding them. So if you have a net worth of at least $250K and at least $100K in liquid capital, click the link in the description to set up an intro call with me today, and I'd be glad to help. And for everyone, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss content like this. Be sure to drop a comment below if there's a topic you'd like to hear more about.